Thank you very much, and it has been a full and rewarding day, starting several months ago after the primary, visiting the president in Washington, D.C., and asking him to come to New York to look at the strategic partnership that we put together, where every level of government is interacting to deal with this issue of violence in our city and in our cities. And after that meeting, immediately after the primary, the police department, John Miller, who's here now, and others instituted this first level of partnership. And we saw the outcome of that partnership today. The president was truly impressed with that, but also told him something else, something that is often missed in the conversation that I'm having around this violence, the feeders of violence. And I told him at the time that, Mr. President, I need for you to come and see the people on the ground that are doing this amazing work to stop the feeders of violence. It's one thing to have the intervention, what we must do right now, but how do we stop this endless flow of violence? And the call was to come out and visit one of our crisis management teams, and he agreed to that. And I'm sure he was truly impressed with what he saw out in Queensbridge, the number of shootings that have dropped substantially based on what Kay Bain is doing. And I wish I had him for the whole day, because I would have taken him out to East New York to visit A.T. Mitchell and what he's doing in Man Up. Their level of commitment and dedication of getting to the source of the violence. And so while the NYPD primary function is to deal with the immediate intervention, but we are creating a partnership with our crisis management teams to create the prevention, and they're going to meet together. Historically, there has been a division between the city agencies, the police department, and the crisis management teams, and that is where we have gone wrong. That's the same division we saw in the city, state, and federal level on going after the shooters and those trigger pullers. And so we're seeing the bridging together of all of our resources to stop crime, prevent crime, and build more healthier children and families in our city. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited to bring it to the president. He says, Eric, this is a model we need to take all over the country. And as I rode with him in the presidential limousine, I was able to have a good conversation and talk about more money for the city and how do we continue to make these advancements. And so I really want to thank the President, the Attorney General, Ambassador Wright, and everyone else who came to the city today. He was dealing earlier this morning with terrorism overseas, but he came to New York to deal with the terror that many people are experiencing right here in the city and come up with real ways and solutions to do so. I said it earlier, and I'll say it again, justice, safety, and prosperity is what we are focusing on, and we can build the right partnership to do that. And we do it by prevention and intervention. And that's why these gentlemen are here. As a matter of fact, can y'all do something for me? Can you switch seats with him? Because we're not on different sides. We're mixing it up. We're mixing it up. There you go. The real partnership that Deputy Commissioner Chauncey, what you did today and showed how to get this right is so important on fighting this violence in a real way. Last week, a few weeks ago, the time is moving so quickly, we outlined our blueprint to end gun violence. And in that blueprint, we talked about some of the prevention that we are looking at. I just think that people almost have a deaf ear when I talk about the prevention. They just keep going back and forth. Well, are you going to bring back stop and frisk? Are you going to bring back anti-crime? Read the plan. You know, some person called me the other day and said, well, you know what, you're not doing anything for foster care children. I said, did you read my plan? Well, that's what someone told me. No, let's do something revolutionary. Read the plan. My plan cannot be defined on a tweet. It's defined by picking up the document and reading it. And then it's also defined by just coming to City Hall and sitting down and say, Eric, can you explain this to me so I can better understand what your vision is? And we don't want to do that, but I am not going to allow us to stay divided as a city, because we have a unified battle of making our city safe and not feeding crime throughout our city. And so this morning, the White House announced that the federal government would direct more resources. We are really hoping we put more resources into ATF because it's imperative that ATF is allowed to give us the data so that we can find the source of these guns that are finding their ways into our city. He's also calling on Congress, as he mentioned, to get additional funding for the crisis management teams on the ground. We want crisis management teams in every hotspot in the city. AT, you talked about this over and over again. It is imperative that we identify the hotspot. 30 precincts are contributing to 80% of the violence. So although we want to do precision policing to go after the small number of people, less than 1% is participating in 17% of our shootings of individuals, although we want to do that, AT is really strong on saying we need precision resources. How do we get those who are committing crime and give them the resources that they need? So I stand shoulder to shoulder with the president, calling on this 9/11 type response to dealing with violence in our city and making sure that this could be a safe place and a model on how we could move throughout the entire country. And so I want to bring on A.T. Mitchell, then we'll bring on the deputy commissioner, and then we'll bring on Kay Bain, and round it out with John Miller, a longtime advocate and fighter on keeping our city safe. My mask, they'll talk about me.
So good evening. Today was a very historic day here in New York City. I'm sure that everyone would agree that we've never seen this happen before in the history of New York, where the feds, the state, the city, and the community came together around a very serious long-term issue that we've been suffering from here in this city and across this country, called gun violence. And as been mentioned over and over again, gun violence is a public health crisis. Gun violence as we know it, as we treat it in the crisis management system, is a disease. It's the type of disease, just like COVID, is contagious. It passes from person to person. And if it's left untreated, it will ruin everything in its way. So it makes all the sense in the world for this mayor to do something by asking for all hands to be on deck. It makes all the sense for everybody that has been doing their part. You know, we have often talked about that the NYPD has their job to do, and they're doing their part. But there's another hand to this issue, and that's the community. And those members and partners and colleagues of the crisis management system, we have our part to do, and we're doing our part. We're doing our very best. We've been doing as best as we can with the least amount of funding that we've been able to receive thus far. And believe it or not, with that least amount of funding, we have been making significant strides with reducing gun violence in the target areas where we have our boots on the ground. And so today is another day where we can also feel comfortable and feel glad to know that the help that we've been looking for has arrived. The fact that we've actually have commanded and we've drawn the attention of the President of the United States, the Governor of the State of New York, and the Mayor of the City of New York says that this work that we've been doing collectively is working, and we're heading in the right direction. So we, at the Crisis Management System, the men and women who are trained under the Cure Violence Global Model, there's many of us that are trained as certified gang specialists, the men and women who have been closest to the problem are the best ones if you arm them with the resources to be the ones that have the solution. And so we're excited about today. The fact that we have now the whole city and country's attention for this very important issue. We are just excited to hopefully rev our work up and hopefully double down on the work that we've been doing and get stuff done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Deputy Commissioner Chauncey, just want to give an overview of what we saw today.
Mr. Mayor, I have read your blueprint, and it's inspiring and it's comprehensive, and it really is. It's the path forward. And what you've done is you set a North Star for this city and really, I think, for the nation, and that North Star is to end gun violence. What I love about it is you don't say reduce gun violence. Your North Star is to end gun violence. And it's going to be many, many parts to that. Kay Bain and I have worked so much together with the People's Police Academy, using asset forfeiture in the NYPD to renovate broken down spaces in Queensbridge and other places. It's a comprehensive strategy. Today's meeting was about a key part of that, which is that there's a tiny, relatively small group of people who drive the gun violence in New York City. And so under the mayor's leadership and the police commissioner's leadership, put together unprecedented, meaning it's never happened before, a partnership of all federal, state, local law enforcement partners in New York City who come together every morning at 10 o'clock, every morning, and they review that small group of people who have been arrested, who are trigger pullers, who are driving the gun violence in New York City, and making sure that everybody is sharing their pieces of the puzzle that they have, whatever that agency may be, whether it's probation or city corrections or this DA's office or that federal agency. Everybody is working together side by side, sharing information to put together the strongest cases possible for that very, very small, very narrow group of people, but to make sure that we can do everything we can to keep people safe. It is a model for the city. It's a model for this country. And Mr. Mayor, I know is your vision, as you talked about when you were running for office. This is what you were calling on us to do, and I think that's what the president saw today. Is why aren't we doing this in every city across the nation? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Kay Bain, you know, I was really impressed today. Kay Bain has solidified the concept of the entire community by having a community school that was there. And that principal talked about going from being persistently dangerous school to a safe school. And I believe it was a 3-year period where the children started to believe in themselves again. Instead of producing criminals, they're producing scholars. I say this all the time. The real crime in the city is not only what happens on Mother Gaston Boulevard, it's the school system where 65% of black and brown children never reach proficiency. And we need to talk about it. And we're going to talk about it and expose it. And that's what Kay Bain is touching on. And today we saw the product of combining this model with the principal, and now the principal is able to address the needs of those children so they can start the process of educating. You cannot educate a child that's hungry, that is in a dangerous environment, that does not have eyeglasses if they need it, if their clothing are not clean, they're not going to be educated. And too many people take it for granted, because when their child leaves in the morning, they're fed, they're clean, they have all the needs they must have, and they're not sitting in the classroom worrying about what conditions they're in. And that's what Kay Bain represented. So, Brother Kay, why don't you come on and do your thing? Appreciate you, man.
Good evening. I will be brief. Today was the greatest day in the history of days. I start every day that way. The President of the United States came to New York City and said, how do you do it? How in the midst of all this pandemic and all this strife and strife, how does New York City remain so resilient? How is it that you're able to still find ways to engage the community and bring public safety into a collaborative spirit? I agree with the mayor when he says everyone has a role to play in producing public safety. I think he has the hardest job in the world. I would never want to be in that position to have to hold all of these different agencies and entities and egos together, but that is what the gentleman has stepped up to do, and that's his job, and he's doing a stand-up job of it thus far. Right now, the mayor is saying we can walk and chew gum at the same time. He's saying that we can have a safe city where officers do their jobs well and respect people and residents in neighborhoods, and we can have community-led public safety where persons in their communities play a vital role in making sure that we have a higher quality of life. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Again, it sounds fundamentally simple, but it's a difficult thing. It hasn't happened. But before the mayor was the mayor, he invested in what we were doing. He spent time with us in the trenches, as we call it. He was there present. Even now, in the midst of crisis, this first week in the new year, the mayor has been everywhere. We see him at 2, 3 in the morning when we're occupying corners. We see him at the funerals of police officers, of babies. He's everywhere that the people are. And that's really important. Because in this experiment that we call 2022, where we're going to try to learn from great and best practices, we're going to have to think outside of the box. So I'm someone historically, I grew up in the underground economy. I grew up outside of the boundaries of law as a youth. I was lost on a lot of levels. I had an aversion to working with law enforcement. I had my ribs broken by law enforcement as a young man. It's difficult for me to see us all working together, but I'm seeing us all working together because the mayor is that bridge. And I'm not unique in that. We can't ignore the elephant in the room. We can't ignore that there has been a distrust between communities of color and law enforcement. But the mayor is a complicated human being. He's former law enforcement. Far as I can see, he's been a black man for 40-something years. He's probably good at that. He's from Brooklyn, and he shows up. So I'm looking at the plan, and I'm saying to Mr. Mayor, I said, Mr. Mayor, today, I said, what if we were to do some symposiums, some human justice, public safety symposiums, and go into every borough and talk to law enforcement, next to formerly incarcerated people, next to community residents, and dissect and take apart some of the yellow flags, the things that stand out in your plan. And he said, let's do it. He said, I want to hear from the people. I want that feedback, K. Bain. So we're going to do that. We're going to go to where the people are. We're going to ask those questions, and we're going to get a report. And we're going to say, Mr. Mayor, here's where the people definitely agree. Here's where there was confusion. And here's what the people are saying. A leader is someone who cultivates leadership. In order to do that, you have to be vulnerable enough to hear the things that you might not want to hear. You have to be vulnerable enough to grow. Well, right now, we're looking at a mayor who has that courage, that vulnerability, and in this moment has decided to grow with us as New York City. Thank you.
Open to any questions?
Yeah, sure.
Jeff got caught off guard.
Yeah, look, the 9/11 response, I find that to be interesting because, look, it was a lot of collaboration, of course, after 9/11, federal government coming in. But when people hear 9/11 style response, they often think of too much, abusing civil liberties. How do you balance that when it comes to responding to gun violence? Is it possible to respond without having too heavy of a hand?
Without a doubt, we could do it. And, these guys are the guardrails. I call them all the time and say, how should we be moving forward? What should we be doing? And we can do this together, because the more they are successful at their jobs, the less you are going to need law enforcement to play a role. That's the balance. The balance is the safer we get, we can start moving into the next level. Now, we're not going to say tomorrow that every police officer in the Bronx, where almost 30-something% of our shooters are coming from, we want you to move out of the area and no longer patrol the streets. But as more that we give the resources in those areas, then you will see the lack of the need of having police officers patrolling those areas. But we got to protect people right now. That's crucial. But we can start putting the resources into organizations like these so we can lift up having the presence of police that may not be needed in those areas.
Mr. Mayor?
Hold on. I'm not going to forget you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask, as part of your blueprint for public safety, and as well as today with the President, you both called on Congress to pass these long-stalled gun control bills. Those bills have been held up by Republicans for years. At the same time, your plan views them as a key part of disrupting the Iron pipeline. So unless Republicans in Congress suddenly drastically change their minds, are you even going to be able to disrupt this pipeline, or is it just going to...
Great question. Great question. That's a great question. And as I stated over and over again, I use the analogy that there are many rivers that feed the sea of violence. And what I did was use my law enforcement experience, my experience as a lawmaker and as a borough president and as a volunteer that actually I was in the street during the 80s doing patrols, street patrols. I use all of those things to define the rivers that we must dam. I hope that the river that's coming from Albany, the river that's coming from the feds, the river that's coming from the lack of housing, I hope people heard it and say, okay, let's look at what Eric is saying based on the experience he has. Are we going to be able to get the help that we want 100%? Probably not. But I got to put it out there. Regardless of what they do in those other bodies, we're going to do our job. There are things that are within my span of control. It is within my span of control to partner with these organizations. It's within my span of control to have my officers do precision policing to go after those guns. We removed 6,000 guns off the streets last year, and close to 400 were removed this year. And so we're going to do our job. And I'm hoping that the public understands we need this partnership. And you're right, those bills have been tied up for a long time, and we may not get them unless we get the control we need in Washington, D.C. In the interim, we're going to build out this foundation that we're talking about right here in the city of New York to try to prevent the flow. We are in control of putting in place checkpoints at our port authorities to make sure those guns that are coming on the Greyhound bus don't continue to do so. We're in control of dealing with the legislation around ghost guns. So there are things we can do right here while we're waiting on Congress to do their job to deal with this violence.
And just a quick follow-up, if I may, on an unrelated topic. Bloomberg News earlier today reported that their Chief of Staff, Frank Barone, was recently subpoenaed in...
We're doing on-topic first. We'll do off-topic later.
Okay, I'll get that. Go.
Mayor? Hi. Jay.
Yes, what's up, Jay? How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
In light of your conversation with the president, I want to talk about federal health. We know what federal health looked like back in the 80s with federal squads out on the streets throughout the city. What does federal resources, additional federal resources, look like in 2002? And do you think there's a concern about people in the community having flashbacks about their experience 40 years ago?
And yes, and they should, because it was horrific, and they're concerned about it. But let me tell you the duality of that concern, and I am on the ground. They don't want to be disrespected in policing, but they also don't want to feel the abuse of violence. That's what they're saying. And they don't have to live with the either or. And that's what I am saying as their mayor. We're not going to tell you that you have to be heavy-handed policing in order to be safe. And so AT said it right, that, there was a lot of distrust. There was a broken trust, a covenant, and we need to rebuild that covenant. People are going to regain their trust, and we're going to build a different relationships with the police department. Yes.
More street teams from the DEA, ATF in the 5 boroughs. Do you see that happening?
Well, today that we pointed out that there's just a small percentage of people who are contributing to 17% of our violence in the city, and they're less than 1%, less than 1.001% of our population. So when you start focusing on those drivers of crime, then you could do precision and not this wide net. We saw a wide net in the past. We're not going back to those days. I am not going to allow any abusive police practices to take place in this city.
Mayor, as I'm sure you know, people have heard promises before and they're skeptical. So let's talk about some specific details. What specifically, first of all, did you learn from the president today that you didn't know the day before? And in terms of a timetable, when do you think people are actually going to see fewer guns flowing into the city?
Well, people, I remember January 2nd, people were asking me that question, and I was only 2 days in office. You don't have New York is a corporation. I'm the CEO of New York City. And when you go in to take over a corporation, you don't go to the CEO and say, you've been there for 2 weeks, how come you haven't turned around? Let me put my systems in place. I'm going to put my systems in place. We're rolling out our plans, and we're going to execute those plans. I want violence in the city to end day one. That's what I want. I don't want to continue to see the violence. I don't want 6 police officers shot, 2 assassinated, and 11-month-old children shot in the street. We don't want to see the crime we have in our city. But the goal is to fix the cycle of poverty and crime, as well as deal with the immediate crime. And so I can't tell you what's going to happen on Monday, if we're going to all of a sudden end the violence that we have witnessed and that's taking place across the country. I can't say that. You're going to get the best fighter possible to get the city on the right track. That's what I am in control of, and I know I'm going to do.
Mr. Mayor,
yes, sir.
Talking about the importance of and the success of these programs in both in Queensbridge and in East New York. I was wondering if you had an estimate. It's a question of resources. I was wondering if you had an estimate for how much it would cost to stand these up, across the city in places that need them, and then, regardless of what happens at the federal level in terms of funding, are you willing to commit to funding them in this budget?
Well, all of you who cover this, we're dealing with a major economic crisis right now. I had all of my agencies, for the most part, do a 3% PEG program to eliminate the gap, to make sure that we get the waste out of government, and particularly in the agencies, to be smarter in how we spend taxpayers' dollars. Once we do that analysis, we'll be able to look and see how I can put it with my number one crisis. My number one crisis now is dealing with the violence in the city. And we're doing it every morning. I have an analysis with my Office of Budget to find out how are we going to look, how I can put additional money in these resources. So I can't commit to anything until I know exactly what our budget sheets are going to look like. But they have my commitment. Whatever dollars amount we can do to reach the goal of having crisis management teams in every hotspot, that's what I'm reaching to accomplish. That's, I was just talking about that. That's what my Office of Management and Budget is looking at to get the exact dollar amount. We already fund through Mock J. We already fund the teams, and now we need analysis to sit down with them and say where are all these hot spots, so that we can come up with a real dollar amount of what it costs. But I know one thing's for sure, that if we don't get this crime under control, it's going to be too costly, because no one wants to do business here, no one wants to stay here. It is going to hurt our economy. Tied to our economy is making the city safe. So it costs too much not to get it right.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, given your differing views on policing with some other politicians, some people in your own party, what makes you think you can get people behind your agenda, particularly in Albany, where there have been issues and many different opinions on bail reform?
Well, I believe that is not accurate. I think there's a numerical majority that is really driving that no one believes we need to have intervention and prevention. When I'm receiving calls all the time from lawmakers in Albany, members of the city council, the public safety chair of the city council did an interview, and she says, I'm dead on with Eric's plan. I think the loudest is not the majority. And if you walk through the streets of this city, New Yorkers tell me each and every day that we're believing what you're doing, we're following you, we deserve to be safe, and we trust what you're going to do. And so I'm going to go to Albany, sit down, when many of them are friends, we just disagree. And because we disagree does not mean we can find a middle ground to tweak, not take away what was in place, because my life work is fighting for reform. But I know that we can have the reform that we deserve with the safety that we need.
Many state senators, assembly people have been saying, hey, we haven't been able to figure out whether or not the reforms are working or not, so why don't we wait and see? What do you make of that?
Well, I think that they should speak with. I spoke with Horizon. I went up to Horizon facility where a group of employees there were held hostage temporarily by young people who broke the glass and made makeshift shanks out of them. They should talk to them. And they can see you on the ground. And I really encourage many of you to go up and speak to those employees on the ground. The unintended actions is hurting the people on the ground that's not giving these children what they deserve and what they need. And so I'm going to encourage them to go and speak to people on the ground that are dealing with the results of the lack of tweaking of these laws.
Where do the neighborhood safety teams stand at the moment? I remember you said earlier that there's a chance that some of them could be rolled out earlier than 3 weeks. So I'm just wondering, has any of them been rolled out yet, or is it still in the process of getting applications?
We have a couple of hundred people who put in for it. They have to be trained because we're going to get it right. We're not going to expedite this and, you look over it and then discover that, hey, you did not properly train these guys. We're going to get it right. We already have a team that is that's in uniform and in unmarked cars. They're doing an amazing job. They're taking a great deal of guns off the streets. So the anti-gun unit, not the anti-crime unit, no matter how many times I say that, people keep saying it's the anti-crime unit. They're not in plain clothes. They're going to be in modified police uniforms. And so once they're trained properly, once they're vetted, once we believe they're ready to hit the streets, we're going to turn them out and put them on the streets.
For the crisis teams that are in existence already, what is the measure of success? How can you show New Yorkers that they are successful? And also, do they need to cooperate more in terms of providing intelligence to the police department?
I'm sorry, do they?
Cooperate with the police department more, providing intelligence from the ground?
No, I wouldn't want them to do that. I think that takes them away from being credible messengers. Their role is different from the police department, and we don't want people to feel as though they are just doing the bidding for the police department. They have a totally different function to prevent the violence, and I think that they're doing a good job in doing so. But if you turn them into an extension of the police department, then they're no longer credible messengers, and if that would be picked up on the street instantly. Second, judging their success, we often number one, they are successful, but we often ignore how many lives they save. Kay Bain had almost 2 years without a shooting in Queensbridge, which was known to be one of the most dangerous night shift facilities. And, people don't lift up that success. And with A.T. Mitchell, when he had the tools that he needed, I recall over one summer you had no shooting at all. And so we don't lift up their success and keep reinforcing the support. And so they are saving lives while there's this continuation of lack of support and resources that they need.
Great. We got one off topic. Okay, thanks. As you may have seen, Bloomberg.
I'm sorry, John Miller is going to come on and just give an overview on some stats, when I finish. Yes.
Yes, Bloomberg News earlier today reported your chief of staff, Frank Carone, has been subpoenaed as part of a federal insurance fraud case. That comes on top of reporting that we've done showing that Mr. Carone is embroiled in a variety of legal disputes about money he allegedly owes to companies and landlords. I'm wondering, did you know about all these legal entanglements before you appointed him, number one? And number two, do you think it's appropriate for him to serve in such a high-ranking role while he's entangled in all of this?
Okay, and you know my comment all the time. I'm not going to discuss private conversations I have with people. I'm going to hire the best people to do the job in government, and he's one of the best people to serve as chief of staff.
Sorry. Is it off topic question?
Yeah.
We have a winter storm coming. What are the worst expectations you're preparing for at this point? What's the city doing?
We're going. We always do a rollout. I mean, I'm 2 for 2. The first storm, when people wanted me to close down schools, we were able to keep them open, and our children went to schools. We were hit this weekend with the storm Friday, and we did a great job. I have a lot of confidence in DSNY And I believe that when the storm comes, we're going to be prepared. I think it's an ice storm that's coming, my last check, and we'll be prepared when the storm hits.
John, what do you think?
As you know, as soon as we have the crime stats collated at the end of the month, we always do a release. You probably have the release that came out today. Just to summarize it, and this is for January compared to last January, what we see is overall crime is up 38%, obviously a concern. The categories that are the driver of those numbers are increases in robbery, which is up 33%, and grand larceny, which is up 58%. Robbery, of course, is money taken by force or the threat of force. Grand larceny, as you all know, the driver there is the shoplifting, and the shoplifting is also accounting where there's an encounter with a store employee where there's either the force or threat of force for a lot of the robbery increase. So that's what we're seeing, but you can get to the press release. It breaks it down by category, and I think just to pull all of that together with this, murder is actually down 15%, but in the felony assault category, we see a 12% increase, which covers our shootings. In the what are we doing about it part, you can start with the President of the United States of America came today to see the innovative processes we're using to focus particularly on violent crime, particularly on shooters, and when it comes to community-based organizations, we have a predictive violence session that we go through every week where we take gang and crew-related shootings in response to your question and break them down and map them and say which crew is shooting at which crew, where is the most likely retaliation and when. We talk to the Mayor's Office of the Crisis Management System, CMS, and we say, this is what we're seeing in the weather report of violence as to where we think there may be more and where and when and how and by whom. And that is where they go into their maps and say, where do we have those providers? Where do we have violence interrupters who are in place who can move in before that retaliation and cool things down? So what you have is a combination of enforcement efforts and what Chauncey has put together with the Intelligence Bureau to focus on it shooting by shooting, gun suspect by gun suspect, where you really boil down to a universe of under 700 people who are responsible as the trigger pullers in 2 or more shootings citywide. That isn't the stop and frisk model of let's go out and stop people. That is the precision policing model of let's zero in on who are those individual persons who are the key drivers of violence, who account for 17% of all shootings in New York City, but make up 0.1% of the populace. So it's not just precision policing. It's the microscopic version of precision policing, and it's wrapped in a lot of legal process that involves search warrants, subpoenas, investigations, and the courts. So that's what we're seeing kind of overall. But please take a look at the press release. It breaks it down by category and number.
Thank you all.